Hey Collective, it's Alan. I'm coming to you with a video that will be accompanying a post I'm releasing on LinkedIn that for the first time will be included in the description to the YouTube video so as to create a little circular moment because of the wealth of knowledge that came from the post that I was releasing, which centered around the topic of the idea of what if we as souls are but studying within the great architect, God, or whatever the great creator is to use, library, and are but revisiting storylines that we are acting out in physical form. But the thing with this written form was it was a little bit more reduced, and so I wanted to take it upon myself to kind of expand upon the thought process as to how I came to that and the possibility that I'm bringing forth in a way that brought everyone along to the storyline, which is why I included both versions to each other. So essentially what had happened was I started to look at people as I met them in a different light. And I started to realize it had to do with my own core value system and something that I do that's very spiritual that I've kind of always done since I was a child, which is I used to use books as a means to understand a topic or some sort of storyline or a through line that I didn't quite understand, and I used to use it as a means in order to absorb information so as to act accordingly if I ever ran into a similar situation. And so over time, I didn't really think anything of it, but as time progressed and the more I ascended and the more spiritual studies I partook in, I started to discover that there was an underlying current to that kind of ideology or that type of philosophy, which was I started to understand that people are mirrors of one another. And if you guys have gone back or been with me for a minute here, have discovered that I actually look at life as a hall of mirrors where we basically surround ourselves with like-minded individuals or people who meet us at our vibration and kind of act accordingly to where we are on the evolutionary ladder, realizing that it's not a race, it's more of a pacing thing where you just take 2 steps every day and you do your best. But beginning from grade school, you're at a certain grade and you're learning, and then as you move into junior high, you begin to become more individualized and you start to develop different interests, different sexualities, different ideologies, different faith bases, and you start to then move into the high school experience, and then you become more clique oriented and more of pack mentality. And then you progress through the Hall of Mirrors and you evolve into the college type mentality, and you start to really identify more on an individual level with new topics and fields of focus. And so you're constantly mirroring each other and who you surround yourself with. And so the more I thought about that, the more it kind of developed over time to this ideology that we are indeed in the Great Earth Academy and that we are somehow aspects of the divine that is studying. But one of the things I neglected in that thinking was what that could mean at a much higher level, at a much higher vibrational cosmic level. And the idea then that you could then be in of yourself having a circle moment within you as an aspect, the lower expression of the great architect, and you're rediscovering itself, it's rediscovering what it has been through. And kind of this beautiful momentum that was building with action-oriented motion, and that we would be choosing different options than maybe what we were reading at this cosmic spiritual level. And that we were basically, as I said before, all walking thought processes that were in motion so as to see what we do in any given situation, which is why you guys know I love to study people as a whole. And I love to really think about why some of us who have the same background, same upbringing, same type of parents and so forth, make different choices. Why some people make it in life and some people don't make it in life. What makes some people driven, what makes some people not driven, when they have similar situations that have occurred in their past. And what I ended up realizing in that momentum was that it kind of evolved a little bit more to something at a much higher degree, which is instead of just being thought processes, what if we as the students, as souls in the Great Earth Academy, were actually studying the great architect and how it became the great architect, meaning God or whatever you believe in. And that we might actually be part of a much bigger concept, a universal mind that is rediscovering itself. And I thought, well, isn't that fascinating? Which is where the piece came from. It really centered around the idea of us maybe coming to realize at a much bigger, broader scale that we are indeed aspects of the divine that through our course of actions, through our lifetimes, are actually in the process of rediscovering how to be a co-creator or how to understand what the great architect is doing through each of us. And in that, I made this transition almost involuntarily, where I started to look at people that I met day to day as actual books. Meaning that instead of just making an assumption about somebody in the way that it appeared, I realized that the universe was telling me, well, at least look at the back cover. And then I would kind of glance at somebody and ask a couple of questions, and I could kind of feel their vibration. And I was starting to be able to identify past experiences that I could share with them that brought some camaraderie to the situation. So the more that developed over time, sorry guys, my hair is drying, I'm on my way out. But the more that developed over time, I started to then think about it from the cosmic level of like, okay, so if we are reading each other, which is something that I included in the post, that we have begun learning how to read one another, which in a lower vibration is read someone for filth, or at a higher vibration is taking the time to understand where someone is coming from and trying to embed yourself by walking in their footsteps to see how they came to the outcome that they came to without judging them. And that's why we always said, don't judge a book by its cover. And so I started to really look at everyone I experience in life as a book. And I started to wonder which of them were just individual books and which of them were part of like an encyclopedia set. And then I started to wonder, well, in an encyclopedia set, it's a series of topics, all right in sequential order. And I started to go, well, okay, at an advanced level, let's go a little woo-woo. What if that included our reincarnations? What if we were part of a bigger part of the library, the more evolved you are, where your past lives are in chronological order, and as students, we can study other people who have left breadcrumbs to such degree. And so I really started to invest my mind into this concept that we are reflections of each other at whatever place we are, and that when you finish studying something, you move up, you ascend. And it started to remind me of the ascension process of all the things that happen and how many people you shed as you evolve spiritually, right? Because when we all start, a lot of us are very religious based, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I've said from the very beginning that religion is super important. It's the doorway to everything. You cannot survive in this world, in my humble opinion, if you don't have some sort of faith-based system that makes you understand what divinity is, what hope is, what love is, and what compassion is, even at your worst. So in that, I started to really analyze what that meant on a cosmic scale as far as how you move beyond those things when things become more regimented and more dogmatic. And you find yourself not being really in alignment with that and all of the changes that come in your life when you start to break away from such things. And how when we speak spiritually about ascension, we talk about the shedding and the purification process. And you start to lose a lot of family and friends that think you're crazy and all this other stuff as you evolve because they're not keeping pace with you. And we saw this a lot with the pandemic, where couples that used to be very together suddenly were thrust into each other's space nonstop and they couldn't escape one another. They had no out. And they ended up divorcing each other. It was just part of the evolutionary process. But in the word evolutionary, I just thought, well, that's interesting. What if we as souls are evolving through different storylines that we are at that level of, and as we move upwards, we are then seeking higher reflections of ourselves in everything we do? Which brought me to the whole topic of the collective consciousness, which, as you guys know, we've been talking about Carl Jung's collective unconsciousness. And one of the pieces that I released about a year ago centered around the topic of, well, at some point the collective became conscious of their shadow and their ego having taken control of them, and the battle that wages between the higher mind, the vessel, and then the ego, which is the shadow. Or, it goes in triplicates, right? So it's the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, the Mother, Daughter, the Holy Ghost. It can be the super id, the id, and the ego, whatever your variation is and wherever you vibrate most with. You realize that there was a battle that was raging between us. And for the higher you go as a spiritualist, the more you realize that they need to come into alignment as opposed to trying to suppress one another. It's the act of the three working in tandem. But at some point within the process, many of us have come to realize that we're now looking for soul tribes. And I started to really look at it from the standpoint of books I was reading. Not like a page turner in physical form, but from the perspective of, well, okay, so what was I seeking? And I realized, I was seeking new experiences, because the way that I interact with people on a day-to-day now as a reflection of this thought process is that I'll look at somebody and never judge them. But if in my interaction, I identify parts of myself that no longer exist, that bring no merit to me, but maybe weigh me down, I politely excuse myself from the situation and then send compassionate love towards the other person, wishing them the best on their journey, but I don't engage in the book. I don't purchase it. I don't then revert backwards, and I don't do all that thing, and I don't beat myself up if I do make missteps or whatever. I'm not in that vibration. But instead of judging them, because I look at people as books or parts of encyclopedias, I went through the process of realizing, I'm not looking down at them. It's just that I conquered that beast. And the only thing I can do is if they ask me a question, I can be there for them, but they have to do the work. They have to read the pages of their own past, and they have to kind of make peace with it, and they have to kind of rise above it, and they have to really step into their power in a way that then they will even bother to ask me. Because I remember there was times in my life where I was so down that the idea of asking someone else for help was forbidden. I was so egoish and so worried about other people's opinions, and I wasn't really understanding that we're in a school. And I wasn't understanding how many layers there are to the school. So as you guys recall, we went through this whole thing last year about how I was preparing everybody for 2025 and all of the transitions and stuff. But I was really, really focused on this idea of how the collective consciousness is now forming into a conscious state of being. Meaning that we're not singularly focused on just our own individual books, but we're starting to equate how we and other books come together, which is where the idea of the encyclopedia series came from. So I started to really put my perspective into this idea that there is a library up above, whatever you believe, which I believe Delores Claiborn actually spoke to, that it's like at the college level of souls, that you go into like the third level of heaven or whatever it is, that she had explored the topic that we go to a school as a soul once we ascend through the shadow part, and we start to study humans and the evolution of divinity and of soul, right, as opposed to just a physical form. So in that, I started to then try to be interested in other books that I didn't understand, other perspectives at a much higher level that wasn't looking down upon them, but was rather rewardative, because I was looking at the places I didn't know things, right? But I wasn't looking at it like I needed to definitely live that experience, but I was looking at other people who were at the same level, who were like, okay, we get the individual part, and we're trying to master ourselves, and we're on that journey, and that's a whole process. You can't really ever silence your shadow. You have to kind of work through it, because it's part of your story arc, right? You're mastering yourself. But then you get to a certain point when you enter the collegiate experience, which is why I started talking last year about us being souls in a college. I mentioned that some souls would start moving upwardly in towards their master's degree, and then from their master's degree, move into their dissertations for their doctorates. And I said in that, without really paying attention to it at the time, almost subconsciously, I made a comment about the fact that some of us would be taking SATs and different exams into the highest of realms, and that they were basically auditioning us, if you will, or checking into us for those that would be chosen, or whatever your vernacular is. But I hadn't really paid attention to the criteria until I got to the point where I started to look at you and me as books, as part of a series of events that has happened over the course of time, which for spiritualists, or I should say New Age movement, would be more of the Akashic records, which is basically the annals of time written in all of our individual soul experiences that make an amalgamation of who we've become. And so in that process, I then really started focusing my attention on this collective consciousness idea and the representation of how that could just mean community, representing an entire community, a legacy, or how you represent as an amalgamation now, the externalization of your entire family line, meaning reflective of something Oprah actually said, where she said, I don't just stand here for myself, I stand here with 10,000 of my ancestors. And I was thinking about that from the standpoint of this encyclopedia or this series of like a box set of books. And I was like, well, that makes absolute sense. And with the emergence of this idea of the awakening in the new earth mentality, which is the evolution from self-identity and only being egoish and about you to now being about we, the idea then moved into a much broader scope where I started to really invest in the story arcs of other people. And what I started to do when I interact with people is understand who wasn't at my vibration without judging them and sending them love and being there and saying, well, if you ever want to talk about something, let me know. But I didn't purchase the book, meaning I didn't spend a lot of time around the person. I didn't debate them. I didn't get into my ego about it. If they said something nasty about me or snarky, I kind of let it go. I was like, well, you're not, it makes no difference to me. Go with God, be at peace, go do your thing. But I started to invest my time in other books, those of you in our community, that are speaking to the evolution of soul. And I broke away the denominational thinking, which for those of you who saw the very last video was something that I really had to work on because I was a little pissed about the way that things were coming across, about people still thinking within a house or just, like, I'm just a Christian, I'm just a this, I'm just a that. I'm just like, but you're limiting yourself, you're human. And humans are a wide array, it's a rainbow. It has so many different types of people, and where we're at with the crisis and the challenges and all the things that we're going to be going through this year, we needed to break free of the compartmentalization ideology that we are just our color or our sexuality or our gender. We were all going through a lot of changes all at once, and we've become mixed. And in the mixing, I started to really analyze the whole idea about my ancestry and about me being an amalgamation of all of them, walking and now looking for other people who represent those amalgamations, who are conscious of it. And that changed my life forever, because I immediately started to focus my energy on specific things that really spoke well of me, and the things that maybe I still needed to work through. And in partnerships, I started to become very action-oriented about who I was interested in, and I would start doing deep dives beyond what I saw of their PR. I'll give you a perfect example. So there are people in the industries and stuff that I find super fascinating, and they're part or players in something bigger than what is physically being seen. They have like cosmic directions and missions and purposes in life that are being brought into union. And I started to wonder how those unions were being brought together, which if you look at the description or the original blog, you'll understand what I meant. They were being brought together in a way that made me think of something that I have said to myself and to my guides and to my higher self, the higher realms, which is, I'm not looking for a partner that is going to not grow with me. I'm looking for someone that I can have honest conversations with the divine in physical form, meaning that I feel very connected to a higher source, to what you guys call God, Allah, whoever you believe in, the creator, the great architect. I feel very connected to that energy, and I walk in grace, love, and light. That's kind of my whole thing in life. So the person I would be looking for would be a representative of that God love in another person that met me at my interest level, and that we would then create something that brought the world towards each other, or that was of some sort of service. I have a very high service call for whoever I end up with. And it changed the way I was reading in the library, meaning I stopped just focusing on encyclopedias of a soul's individual journey. I started to try to figure out from what I was learning and what I was gleaming and what was being revealed to me. I started to learn that encyclopedias can be set next to each other, and that we're looking for some commonality and soul tribes that are thinking at a much higher level, who are not denominational, who are still faith-based. And I'm still from the House of Christ. I still have that as my core value system, but I've evolved to something where I'm not just a Christian. Obviously, I have, I'm gay and all this stuff, and there's all this stuff, but at the end of the value, I know God loves me. But the point is, I'm looking for other people who understand that it's not just individualized. It's much broader than what we're representing. And the more that we speak in vernacular that keeps it small to just individuals within the same fraternity or the same house, the more divided we continue to be, and the easier it is to control us and to make us come at odds with each other, which is kind of the point. And so I started to read the library differently. Instead of judging anybody, I started to assess what I found interesting in other people when I met them. And I started to really try to ask them questions without being invasive that would help me identify parts of myself with them to see if it would keep pace with each other. So for me, someone who is still going through their ascension process, we're at the beginning and they're still heavily involved in whatever their vices are and haven't gotten a bit of control over it, is someone I'm still going to be there for, but I'm not going to mate with that person, or it's not going to be a long-term partnership, but I understand that they'll probably make it to the finish line where the rest of us will be in their own time. So I don't rush anybody, and I started to become very patient. And I started to then analyze people within the media system and within the world at large that spoke to my ear. And I started to pay close attention to texts that I had read when I was younger that I didn't quite understand, like the Pistis Sophia. I read it once when I was in my 20s. And it was a little above my head. And then recently I went back and read it again. It made fucking perfect sense to me. And I was like, oh, I get it. Okay. So that type of knowledge base then reduced my need to make as much mistakes as I did before, because I was able to look at other people and look at where their storylines are going. And I was able to ascertain what were the pitfalls they might face. And the strategic part of my brain started to take in the information without me having to step into their shoes necessarily in lifetime, but mentally and spiritually able to understand how they got to where they're going without being invasive. And that kind of opened my life up a lot, and I'm hoping that might open your eyes too. Because when you meet someone else, if you understand the idea of being in God's library or whoever the creator is to you, you understand that that is part of their journey. It's a chapter in their book. Because if we are all one and all part of Source, whatever you call God to be, then we are all aspects of the chapters to that story arc and how that form came to be, how that infinite creator came to be. Because we are the variables of storylines that are being tied up in different ways, shapes, and forms, right? And so I started to really analyze, well, does that mean that we are ourselves just memories in the books? Or are we souls that he has chosen, in whatever way you believe that to be representative of different storylines that are evolving, which is why I'm such a big proponent of the evolutionary model, both spiritually and scientifically. Because we can't stay stagnant. And you guys know I've been writing to that for quite some time now about the fact that come hell or high water, they're going to move us forward, and we need to be as responsible and as ready as we can. And some of the best thing you can do is really analyze what you are seeing and what you experience daily to really get a gauge of where you're going. Because like I said, I can read a book, a physical book like the rest of you can, and gain as much knowledge as I can. But as we know from going to college into our master's degree or into actual real life settings, you then have to convert knowledge into action. And a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of shortcomings can come from the wrong analysis and wrong ingestion of information, and then not being able to actually use it in the field. And so my book study, what I began to focus on as far as people, began to be much more focused as successful people who have actualized whatever I've learned and put it into the 3D reality in manifestation and operate at that vibration. So I started to really pay attention to people who, I won't say low vibrational thinking, but people who really got off on the egoish nature of spiritual ego. And I started to move that out of my way in order to get the better assessment of the library. And I started to look for parts of it in my head that are you guys, that spoke to me in physical form, understanding that your soul is a thought process that is actualizing itself. And I started to look towards people that were going the direction I was heading in. Because I realized I was part of a different class, a front row class, that is manifesting a higher principle in our camaraderie. But if you guys are truly spiritual, for those of you who are on the path, you'll understand that for the most part, you don't get to meet people anymore. A lot of it has to do with your guides, your own spiritual investment, and if you're willing to do the due diligence of walking and talking what you've learned and sharing it with the world. And you go through challenges, trials, and tribulations. You go through all sorts of shit. Because you're being sorted into your houses. And then if you understand the concept of being in a library, you are learning how to avoid pitfalls by the interactions you not only do in school, but that you do in the 3D reality. Because that is your training ground. And so the library became an actionable thought process for all of us to really engage each other differently. Because one, if we are truly all from Source, then we are all aspects of Source interacting with each other. And so in that momentum and in that clear thinking, I realized something that explains kingdom spouses and divine unions and twin flames all at once. Basically, what I realized is if this thought process is valid to you, then maybe the great architect is looking for company in our exchanges with each other, taking hero journeys from different vessels of light within his own books that are now capable of cross-pollination with each other and creating something new that isn't already known and established. Because we are heading towards a new earth. We're heading towards the Aquarian age, and we know that it's a whole revolution for everybody. But many of us are not afraid of it, and many of us are embracing the unknown because we know there's something there. What if what's there is what we've been wanting this entire time? Why does anybody go through a spiritual cleansing? Why does anybody go into religious houses? Why does anybody evolve in New Age? It's because they're trying to better themselves. And they're trying to find a way to serve humanity. But you have to be in right alignment with the right group of people for it to work properly. But what if it's a step beyond that? What if you are the embodiment of the divine finding its mate somewhere in the universe, and you guys then act in accordance to each other as mirrors? Just two. One becomes two. And when that one becomes two, you are now engaging actively in divine inspiration and divine light and divine co-creation. Because now you and another person are at the same vibration, and you're studying each other and keeping each other in balance and making sure you keep each other accountable because you're at that level. But in essence, the divine is basically through us at this level, mirroring itself so as to see what it still needs to grow, what it still needs to evolve, and what newness it can bring to the table. And that makes our journey now fascinating to me, which is where the peace comes from. I mean, if you really think about it, it's amazing. It means that some of us are reaching a point where we're going to be living in a divine alignment, meaning that we're going to be serving humanity in a way that brings upliftment to the world, not just ourselves, not just the communities, not just our immediate surroundings, or just not a certain groups in the internet, but like actually bringing the world towards each other in an interesting way. Which is why I then started to talk about groupings of souls, right? Because we understand that divine union is basically divine masculine, divine feminine, whether you're male, whatever your gender is. Like, it's variations, but you can be divine masculine and be feminine, you can be divine feminine and be a male. It just varies on what your dominance is as a soul. But you're coming into alignment with each other. Well, but who do you work with once you start building, right? And so you start getting into the idea of groupings. And I started to understand the idea of the hierarchy. The idea behind those that directly serve the great architect for the greater good of humanity. Remember, Source created both light and dark for a reason. And there's a surrounding to that that's very protected. But the people within that, some of us mistaken as gods. Meanwhile, they're just helpers. There are aspects of the divine that work as a pivotal function that is developed in the mindset of whatever you believe that to be. Now, this is getting really high up there. I'm sorry if I'm turning some of you off, but it's just a philosophical conversation. But I'm sharing with you how interesting it got. So I started to look at like angels and archangels, and I started to look at that ideology of like aliens or advanced beings that are somehow of service to the divine. And I started to realize that they were benchmarks of souls that had actualized right alignment for the great architect and now serve at a much higher cosmic order to bring as many people up as they can without taking free will and freedom away from them. And my eyes just opened, and I was like, oh, that explains why we're in the library, right? Any true pupil that can see, and I mean that in every way, every true pupil that can see clearly will fall into an alignment that is perfected. And we always had these misconceptions of what perfection meant. But when I was looking at it through the library, I'm talking about a student. I'm talking about someone who knows that they have their shortcomings and who still works through it every day. These are individuals who have not had any ability to break down. They keep going no matter what, because they're actually on this idea that they're going somewhere. There's somewhere over the rainbow. There's a pot of gold. But what if the pot of gold is each other? Divine vessels of light that are representative of Christ consciousness or of God consciousness that are actively working together to serve humanity. Because if we do that, then that opens up a whole new evolutionary model where the turquoise leadership that spiral dynamics was talking to manifests into physical form. That means the people are putting their egos and their personalities, and whether they're Republican or Democrat, whether they're gay or straight, whether they're Hispanic, white, black, whatever the fuck you are putting it aside and going, yeah, but we're human. How can we serve as many humans as we can? How do we fall into alignment with what Christ really represented, which was compassion, empathy, and upliftment of all people? How do we manifest that while still being honest within ourselves and not breaking our character mold because we are who we are? It is our differences that make us the diamond. But the diamond has different facets. And so if we're part of one big diamond, we're finding our place by finding each other. And we're identifying books that are reflective of each other, where the yin sees the yang and the yang sees the yin, and they're like, oh, we're supposed to work together. It's a duo. It's part one and part two. And then there's always part three, because you're either going to produce children or you're going to produce something into the world that has its own identity. But it makes sense from the Trinity, right? But we're in a library, and everyone you meet is a book that is interacting with another book. And it is your choice in everyday action whether you're going to invest your time in purchasing that book. And if you look at the world that way, then you understand that you're all on similar journeys. You just have different perspectives on how that should be accomplished. And that's what makes the journey interesting, right? Because the point of a library is to keep expanding it with new ideas, new concepts, new things to bring the world together. The more unified we are, the stronger we are as an organism. And it really anchored me into the idea of what if the architect is re-experiencing itself through the eyes of its students. And those students are manifesting itself, reminding that energy of how powerful it is in its own way. It knows who it is. But what if it had disciples? What if it had vessels of light? What if it had children, which all of earth is technically the children of God? What if we have been invited to an academy that's so elite that we have access to his private library? And would we respect it? And what will we do with that knowledge? And suddenly my world exploded into Technicolor. So when you read this piece, I want you to really think about it expansively and figure out how it uplifts you and if it even serves you. Because if it doesn't make sense to you, then it's not going to make sense to you. But again, remember, with like Pistis Sophia, when I read it the first time, I didn't completely understand it. I understood the Mary Magdalene connection, but I didn't understand the whole thing. Whereas the second time I read it, it was clear as a fucking bell, and I was like, oh, I got it, okay. So don't ever feel like you're left out of the conversation. Just know that whatever this brings you, as far as an epiphany or an idea or something creative that sparks in you, understand that that was my intention. Just because you may not understand the overall arc of a storyline doesn't mean you can't understand the chapter you're reading clearly. And then as you move through, you stop having to read the same chapters over again. And when you stop reading the same chapters over again, you move up. And that's what the Hall of Mirrors is. So when you're looking at the books, it's the same thing like when we watch TV. How many of you watch the same TV over and over again because nothing else interests you? Or how many of you watch the same things from the past that really meant a lot to you, but you don't really give this world, this, Marvel comic, whatever world, you don't give it any opportunity because you're done with that part of your evolution. So you don't invest your time or energy into it. And then you start to acquaint yourself with other people who don't have share that mindset of like, no, I understand Marvel comic, I definitely like Agatha all along, but that was the extent of my foray into that world. And so you'll find other people that certainly start having the same comments with you, and though it's not an identifiable mark, it's an indication of the Hall of Mirrors, of what your study and interest is. Those books that you're willing to read over and over again might hold extra keys to you at different intervals through life, right? Going back to Pistis Sophia. I didn't understand all of it. I understood very clearly why Mary Magdalene was the center of that. But I didn't understand all of what was being said until recently when I reread it. And then I found it fascinating. I did it twice because I just thought it was great. Oh, and if you're in right alignment, let me just say this, just to clarify this for you at the higher realms or at the higher levels. You're going to read that, and if you are in real alignment, I'm just going to give you a hint. There are going to be parts, I'm sorry I'm pointing at you guys. There's going to be parts of Pistis Sophia where you're going to clearly know that that was a human misinterpretation of what was said. And you're going to stand on the mountain in that moment and go, that Jesus would never fucking say that. He would never say that. So understand that all of that comes with ascension, right? And then if you're ever in doubt, just ask. If you are a believer in Jesus, you can ask him and he'll tell you. But the point is, you are investing in your experiences and your life experience where you are in evolution. And the same way that you only ingest in videos or movies that you watch what you want to watch and what you're willing to experience is the same that you will experience in life, right? You keep yourself at the same level. Some people literally, when they graduate college, they focus on career. And they focus on one house. They find that they align with the motivations and the morals and ethics of that organization, and they never leave because it is perfectly aligned for who they are, right? So they're investing in storylines that are mirroring that. And then at some point, if they ever evolve out of it or get tired of it, they then want to realign with another organization. So they start investing in studying other books, other departments, other fields of interest, and so they evolve out of that model and they move into a new study. Remember, if you're not learning, then you cannot teach. A teacher is consistently learning, and if you are a student, a spiritual student, you should never not be studying something because you cannot expand consciousness and be part of the collective consciousness ascension if you are stuck in a dogmatic principle where you don't want to grow, because then life comes along and you get pushed. And a lot of what we're going to be witnessing is that push where people have to come face to face with the shadow, and you're going to have to kind of deal with the ramifications of what that means for you, because at some point everyone has to come to Jesus conversation and you get set straight. And one of the hardest things that you have to battle is the inner battle between the higher mind and the ego, which is why if you look at the link below or the description below, and then if you go to the blog, I ended with what if all of this is nothing but the highest mind, the soul, battling the ego. Because if we are truly in a collective consciousness as opposed to a collective unconsciousness, then as a peer group, as an entire school, everyone on planet Earth right now is all taking the same exams, just at different levels. And so we're actualizing the dissemination and the displacement of the ego and taking a higher mind principle, explaining the great divide that everyone's been talking about, where we understand that half the population, well, I don't know about half, but hopefully a large portion of the population will ascend and stop being all egoish and hating everybody and spreading intolerances and all the lower vibrational stuff. they're going to go a different direction. And so as the separation happens, you then start investing in other books. Instead of just investing in a course of research for an individual field of study that you're looking at, you then start to branch out into human beings, and you start to study why we're so different. Again, looking for the similarities to see how they avoided some of your pitfalls or how you avoided some of their pitfalls. And suddenly you're studying humanity. You're not just studying you. You're not just studying spirituality. You're studying the evolution of Gaia. You're studying what it's made of. And you begin to ascend in a much different way. So if we ever meet in person, just know that I see you as a book. And the more that I'm able to tap into, like just looking at you and talking to you and you just being yourself, and the more I realize how aware you are of yourself, I start to then go, I wonder if they're part of an encyclopedia series. And then I start to be fascinated by the choices that people make. And no matter how bad things got for them, or no matter how much shit they get into in the future, I'm still invested in them because I'm looking at them at a soul level. And I'm understanding they're in the same library I am. And they might have the same questions I have. And it starts to funnel your perspective to include multiple perspectives at one, but you start to understand what books you're willing to invest in. The same that you do for movies. And then that branched into another concept, which was, if we're studying books, then are we but screenplays to a masterpiece unfolding? And that was the next topic for another time. Everything in evolution is screaming to us that we are evolving, but the idea that we might be in a library studying God's work and actualizing different aspects with different potentialities from those books gives a creative spark of genius to the way that the universe expands. Right? Because we know if it doesn't expand, it contracts and everything ends. But as long as we continue to make the free will choices and so forth that we do, then the universe continues to expand. Because no matter how bad some people get their lives, so you can be at the lowest, I was at the lowest, if they can turn it around, suddenly the universe goes, why? And suddenly you have a whole section to yourself. It's not about ego. It's about just taking every step every day and doing the best you can and finding that other people find you as interesting as you do in another person. Because, right, we always devalue ourselves. We always play ourselves down. Oh, I didn't have it as bad as they do, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the world's looking at you going, what the fuck are you talking about? How are you even alive? And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. We always downplay ourselves. But if we read, if we invest our time in understanding how to put ourselves in other people's footsteps without actually living it, then we avoid calamities and great big pitfalls. It's part of a learning vessel, which is part of evolution. And as long as we keep evolving and keep working and keep talking to each other and keep inspiring each other and keep being very fruitful with how we came to be where we are, the more other people can then look into your library, into your personal self and go, I'm curious how you did that. How did you overcome, homelessness? How did you overcome rape? How did you because you are so authentically you that it's almost like you read your own book and have caught up and be like, oh, this is where something big happens. Oh, shit. And then you go through the insecurities, and but you're reading a book. And the more that I've learned to look at someone without being demotive to them, but instead being supportive, the more I've gleaned such beautiful pieces of crystallized brilliance, right? Like, you'll see somebody who should be dead, and they're alive, and you look at them, and you're just fascinated. The soul doesn't lie. And if you understand the concept of being in God or the Creator or Allah's library, then you understand that you are now invested into that story arc. And what happens when those storylines begin to be brought together by the great architect to create something that has yet to be developed? What an honor that would be. But it begins by having compassion, empathy, and unitive mindset, because you have to be willing to look at the world from a different perspective in order to understand that through division comes unity. But it takes actors and people in place, not actors, but it takes souls in a particular position who were able to walk through the steps in an acting format to re-understand who they are, to rediscover who they are, to then take all of the amalgamation of not only themselves, their ancestors, and all of their experiences, but then bring it to the world in a way that brings the world inward so as to see what they can learn and glean from it. That takes an incredible skill set. But it's what students do. That's what masters do. That's what, people with doctorates do. They don't beat you over the head. They just are who they are. But in the end, Are they anything else but you and me being two books, seeing if we're in compatibility? And if those books like each other, and if those books can then create a new encyclopedia or can do something great for the world, then that expands consciousness and raises everyone up equally at once. This is an amazing opportunity for humanity to really come together, and you're going to be challenged because they want you as divided as possible. You see it every day. Now they're throwing people out left, right, and center, and they're doing all this other stuff. So you're being challenged with, what are you purchasing? Are you going to be purchasing those books in that storyline? Or are you going to find a way to be of service in another way? And in that, you'll find your soul tribes. Other students at your level reading the same books you are. And understanding how their information and what they've gleaned over time can be of service to a much broader audience. And that is the message of this video. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.